What are the most valued skills in tax professionals by employers? What about attributes? That's the topic of this episode to help you decide where you should focus your efforts. We're joined by Maisie Horrell and Samuel Miner at Pro-Tax Recruitment. You're listening to episode 107 of the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast that helps tax professionals to progress, develop, and improve their careers.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode. At the start of my tax career, I thought tax technical ability was almost the sole ingredient to a successful tax career. But over time, I realised how stupid it was for me to think that. But when you start your career as someone straight from university or school, it's hard to know what really does make a valuable tax professional. And that makes it hard to know what skills you should work on and where you should spend your precious time. Maisie and Sam, our guests for this episode, interact with lots of accountancy firms weekly, particularly in relation to the recruitment of tax staff, so they get to see firsthand exactly what employers want based on the conversations that they have with them. They share with us their firsthand experiences of what skills and attributes are most valued by accountancy firms when it comes to their tax staff, from juniors all the way to partners, regardless of specialism and regardless of compliance or advisory. And from this, you should know what skills you should focus on and work on to get your tax career to where you want it to be. For rough timings of each part of the episode, head on over to the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP107 or go on over to the details section of the episode within your podcast player of choice. As you'll hear, both Maisie and Sam agree that technical ability is the most valued skill across all different types of tax roles. I agree too. I believe strong technical ability underpins all great tax professionals. That's why I recommend everyone works on this from the start of their careers. Yes, you'll get to gain knowledge through your professional qualifications, which I recommend include CTA, but that alone is not going to be enough. You should also learn how to find the answer and solve complex tax queries. This is what I refer to as tax research. And you should also learn how to turn this into something valuable for your employer and clients. Big chunk of this is advisory skills. And if you can become good at both of these early in your tax career, you'll become more valuable more quickly and your career will benefit from that. My two masterclasses, the Tax Research Masterclass and the Tax Advice Masterclass, teach you practical techniques on how to do these well, and they give you the fundamentals to build upon and become strong in both these areas. My next masterclass is in November this year, November 2024. And for full details, including where to enroll, head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/masterclasses. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. I think I'll start with you then, Maisie. If you don't mind, can you just tell us a little bit about you and how you're involved in the tax world?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Maisie Horrell. I'm an Associate Director at Pro-Tax Recruitment. I've worked in the tax recruitment world now for, 5.5, coming up to 6 years. Time goes by so fast. I specifically have built my network over that time in the sort of London area, but also the home counties as well. My network tends to be sort of focused around the larger firms in the market. So I recruit a lot for the big four, but also the top 10 accountancy firms as well. I think as the market is shifting a little bit and growing, I am also starting to focus a little bit more on the sort of the fast growing accountancy firms in the mid-tier space with private equity backing.
Yeah, and if you don't recognise the voice, everyone, Maisie is the one who did the sponsorship wording over the past few episodes.
Yeah, I did. Thanks for reminding me.
It was just when you said Pro-Tax Recruitment, it's exactly the same as how you say it on the recording. Of course it is. It's your voice.
I'm trying to put my posh voice on for the audience today.
You don't have to worry about being posh. I'm from the Black Country, so there's less posh as you can become. Over to you then, Sam. How are you involved in the tax world, and a little bit about you?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So yeah, my name's Sam, and similar to Maisie, I head up our kind of regional tax recruitment. So I'm based in Manchester and predominantly work with accountancy firms across the north. Quite similar tenure to Maisie. I've been in recruitment for a good few years now, and I've always focused in those sort of technical areas. My typical client base tends to be more of those kind of mid-tier and OMB kind of focused firms. And working with fast growing firms that are taking on private equity and stuff like that. So hopefully my version will give a slightly different slant to what Maisie will talk about.
this episode is very much about like the skills and attributes that are, I suppose, highly valued by accountancy firms in particular. So obviously, accountancy firms, as Maisie and Sam have just mentioned, there's a massive range of different types, particularly like Big Four versus the other top 10, and then outside of that, and also PE backs versus not. So Sam and Maisie, because they've got slightly different kind of networks and I suppose people they recruit for, they're going to aim to share their perspective from their experiences, which might be slightly different, but I'm expecting it to not be too similar, but I could be wrong based on what they end up saying in a short while. So shall we start
Yeah.
then by just maybe you want to take the reins first, Maisie, then, but like from your perspective then, like what are the main skills and attributes that are most valued by accountancy firms?
Yeah, so I think obviously the most important skill and attribute I think for any firm actually is hiring somebody with technical skills. So understanding and keeping up to date with those tax laws and legislation. If you haven't got that fundamental knowledge, and whether that's come from a CTA or another tax qualification or just from experience, I think that technical depth and that technical skill set is really important. And I saw you mention actually something, maybe it was this morning, Jack, about people sort of failing their CTA exams. And actually the most common reason tends to be because of that lack of technical depth. And when I was reading that, I completely agreed with it, because I think there's lots of people out there that don't focus enough on developing that skill set. And I really truly think it's the most important one. I don't know if you agree with me on that, Sam.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think first and foremost, it's absolutely those technical skills are incredibly important. Where I would say, with a more mid-tier kind of smaller practice hat on, I think it can differ slightly is just having a bit more all-round technical knowledge. And what I mean by that is, if you're working in that, I suppose, kind of owner-managed business market, value and skills that tend to be valued are tax advisors that, I'm not saying they're an expert in everything, but have an appreciation for lots of different areas of tax, where that might be slightly different in a bigger firm. So having that understanding and be able to perhaps advise a business owner on, on something you're not 100% a specialist on. I always get asked around those particular technical skills.
Yeah. So I suppose just to be clear then, when you two are talking about like technical skills and knowledge, then like what exactly do you mean by that? Do you mean that people know off the top of their head what the tax answer is in certain scenarios? Do you mean that they're able to find the answer or apply it to scenarios? Like what's actually meant by that, do you think? And like what part of it is it that employers find valuable?
Good question, actually. I think it's hard for anybody working in tax to know everything about everything, isn't it? I know tax partners don't even know the answers to everything. I think it's about making sure that if you're in a meeting or a call with a client and they ask you a question, you can give them some technical response. You can react to being under pressure when it comes to talking about tax and the legislation itself. But also, I think more importantly, especially if you're working in tax advisory, then being able to take something quite complex and go away and find the answer to it and research, and then be able to present it back to the client in quite an easy to understand and concise manner.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, that's what I see. I think most of my clients, will say to me, technical understanding and being able to go away and find the answer to something themselves is one of the most important attributes, because they will hopefully then remember that for the next time.
Yeah. And I suppose it doesn't really matter then what scenario they get presented with, they can answer it, which is, I've said for ages, I think it's the most important skill. I think strong technical skills, ability, knowledge is what underpins a good tax advisor. And I struggle to see how you can be good at it if you haven't got that. I'm not saying you need to know everything, but in an area of specialism, I think you need to know a lot and be able to, I suppose, research for those tricky questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Tax legislation and tax laws are changing all the time, aren't they? So I think it's just about keeping on top of those changes and making sure that you're at the forefront of what those changes are and what's happening in the market. Obviously, with the election that's just happened, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of change in the tax world. So it's just making sure you're at the forefront of those changes and able and ready to speak to clients about it where necessary. But I do also think as well that there are other skill sets that are really important, no matter what role you're in, no matter what level you're at, and no matter what firm you're in. And I think that is more so around the interpersonal skill set of you as an individual. And I think these are things that people forget about, and I think they're really important. And it's really, for me, I think, that willingness to learn new skills, that desire to really go the extra mile, and also sort of really putting your hand up, getting stuck in, really showing how keen and ambitious you are to learn new things and to progress your career. I think sometimes those individuals who are a little bit more reserved find it perhaps a little bit harder to progress because they're not at the forefront. But I understand that is quite personality dependent.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about interpersonal skills, then like what are you thinking about specifically there?
So I think, like I said, it's that sort of communication. I think both from a client perspective, so being able to articulate things clearly and concisely to clients in meetings, but also more importantly as well, internally with stakeholders, being able to get involved in things that aren't necessarily in your job title. I think a lot of my clients want people who are willing to go that extra mile. And I think that's kind of an interpersonal skill set that people can do more of. And it's probably one of the easier ones to do better at and to do more of. And I think it just helps you get involved in more projects. It helps you get involved in different things that are going to help you to progress your career.
Yeah. What do you think around the interpersonal skills piece, Sam?
Yeah, some notes that I made on this. I think Maisie's touched on a few of them, but what are the biggest things when I think about it from a mid-tier kind of perspective is that relationship building. And tax advisors that I've seen do really well in this area are people that have probably been encouraged to go to things like networking events from quite an early stage in their careers. And you can tell that when they get a bit more through their careers, that they're able to understand really how to speak and deal with a client. And I think that's really important in an OMB market where, you could be dealing with with a business area. So I think certainly being able to build good relationships is very important. Maisie touched on on the stakeholder management piece as well. I think I've seen this quite a bit where we've had firms that have possibly opened a new tax service line, be it something like indirect tax or private client. And I think you've got to really have good stakeholder management skills to be able to go into a firm where you are a new service line and be able to deal with, because there's probably going to be a lot of existing business that you could almost piggyback on, but they're going to be part of an accounts sort of partner's portfolio. So it's being able to manage those relationships and get the best for that client. And yeah, so I think the stakeholder management skills are really important as well.
Yeah. So should we just delve a bit deeper on that then? Because I'm thinking that's probably going to be more important when you're around, let's say, senior manager grade rather than before then, because it sounds like you're talking about it from like a work winning standpoint and managing a client and delivering a service that they're going to be happy with. Am I on the right track with what you're talking about?
Yes, on my side, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, yeah. So like, is it like a senior manager and above where that starts to become important, or do you think that's important even at the like more junior grades as well?
I think traditionally, if you'd have asked me that question a few years ago, I would have said, oh, yeah, probably more so, kind of senior manager, director, partner, sort of traits. But I see it more and more, I'm asked for those kind of skills more and more at the lower grade. And I think it's because, I don't know if you've experienced this, Jack, but I see a lot more kind of assistant managers being encouraged to get involved in, be it business development through building relationships or going to networking events or, just having a bit of an accountability to sort of think outside the box. So, yeah, I think that's probably been a change over the last few years. Certainly, like I say, when I'm working with mid-tiers.
Yeah, is it the same for you, Maisie, at the big four and larger firm end?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with Sam, actually. I think historically, perhaps pre-COVID times, actually, that kind of business development, client management, client building piece has been a real expectation really for senior manager level and above. But I think it is becoming more and more important at the junior levels as well. I still think that obviously senior managers, directors, and obviously partners, they need to be doing that. They need to be out in the market. They need to be building their relationships internally to be able to cross sell and make recommendations where possible. But I think actually a lot of my clients are looking for talent at the more junior ends who can and want to get involved in more of the client work, more of the client pitching, business development, but also that building that rapport with clients is so important for them. I think assistant managers and managers now want a portfolio themselves. They want a portfolio that they can manage themselves, and they want to be that key point of contact for that client, which is absolutely great. But you need to have those skills to be able to maintain that relationship with that client and be able to provide them with the service that they need and expect. So I think that actually that client relationship building piece is becoming more and more important in the sort of more junior levels within tax teams.
Mhm. So I suppose talking about them then, because from my experience anyway, I think a lot of people around assistant manager would probably lack in that area quite a bit. I mean, is that kind of right from what you see from a recruitment perspective when you're placing people or putting people forward for interviews? Like, I suppose what's it like at the moment? Is it short of what most employers are expecting? Do you think in terms of people's skills there?
Yes and no. I think when I think about, I was at a networking event the other day in Manchester, and there were 3 or 4 sort of quite junior tax associates there from a local firm, and I just thought that was brilliant, because I don't think you would get that at some of the other firms, and that will hold them in such good stead when they're, as they kind of progress through their career. Because when I talk about encouraging, whenever I'm dealing with anyone and they're asking me, how do I get more involved, how do I work on the relationship building, essentially, networking events is one of the things that I always encourage, because I think you kind of force into it a little bit, but it's not a hard sell. You can go there and get what you want from it. And yeah, I think that firms that kind of encourage, tax people to sort of go and, have a bit of ownership and go, right, you go to that networking event, it's okay. Take a bit of time out in the morning, go for a breakfast event or whatever, really helps them in the long run.
Yeah. When you're
Yeah.
talking about events here, though, you're thinking about like networking events where there are the tax people or where there isn't, because it's obviously easier for a tax person to speak to a tax person because they have like the same language and they use the same terms and stuff. But obviously, most clients are going to have a completely different like understanding of those words and won't even have any idea what they're on about. So, do you think it matters what type of networking event they go to? Is it better to go to one where there's not other tax people, or do you think it doesn't really matter?
I think it depends what you're working on. If we're thinking on it more from a broader relationship building perspective, I think going to a networking event with other tax, professionals is fine, or other accountancy professionals, it is fine. I think, if you're wanting to work on your business development skills a little bit more, and you think, what, I want to try and do it in an area that I feel a bit more comfortable in networking, speaking to people, I'd sign up to a few. You can quite easily find them, if you do a bit of research on the internet, there's, like I say, giving Manchester an example, there's quite a few different ones where the topics aren't really about tax stuff, or, really about, accounts focused topics, but you'll go there and I guarantee you'll meet the right people that you should be sort of speaking with, and that presents opportunities. So I'd say a bit of both, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. And also I think it's challenging yourself. It's putting yourself in out of your comfort zone and getting used to that interaction with people that you don't know. And that will, like Sam said, put you in good stead for your longer term career of building relationships, when at that manager and senior manager director level, it's really crucial to success. So I think practicing it earlier on, putting yourself out of your comfort zone and really developing that skill set is quite important to help you progress longer term.
Mhm. So I think then, because it sounds like then pretty much across the board then that technical skills and knowledge is important. Interpersonal skills are important, which I suppose encompasses relationship building and client management as well then. So What about like then when we start looking at like, I suppose the difference between say compliance people and advisory people, because obviously there's going to be a crossover to some extent of skills that are valuable in both, but certain skills I'm guessing are going to be more valued by compliance people who are hiring people in compliance versus advisory. So like what are the main differences in terms of what employers desire, do you think?
I think in terms of the different skills that people look for, I've worked with quite a few firms, and this might be quite a good example where, they've perhaps been coming from a compliance into advisory role. I see that quite a bit and what skills they look for there. And yeah, the biggest one, maybe touched upon it a little bit earlier, but it's that problem solving. And it's how, in an advisory role, you're never going to know all the answers. It's hard to know everything in tax, but when I've worked with individuals and worked with firms that are looking to hire an advisory, it's very much about, right, okay, how do you approach a problem and how do you break it down? And where, if you don't know the answer, where do you go to do that research to find that out? Similarly, from a compliance perspective, tends to be, not that there isn't detail in advisory, I'm not saying that at all, but it tends to be that the skills that are looked for are those more kind of detail orientated skills. So, kind of whether that's like analytical skills or really, consuming data in the right way. That's probably what I would say. I've noticed. I don't know if you've got any other different thoughts, Maisie.
Yeah, I'd say that that's very much the case. I think there is a huge amount of crossover, actually, a lot more crossover than people think. But I think actually thinking about the advisory skill set more so, I know you've just touched on compliance there. So I think advisory, in my opinion, it's developing that business acumen skill set. Again, coming back to that relationship building, but more so sort of, understanding the broader business implications when you're, taking into consideration tax decisions. So it's not just looking at the one thing, it's thinking outside the box. Is there an opportunity here for us to advise on an indirect tax piece of work? Or actually, is there going to be a problem with employment tax here when we're looking at this? Thinking broader and not just looking at the one part of the project itself. It's kind of understanding the whole business as a whole and where you can draw in advice and draw in specialist teams from other parts of the firm. So I think from my perspective, that's what I kind of see as a real sort of key difference in skill sets needed when looking at an advisory role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually quite liked I suppose the term problem solving, Sam, for the advisory side of things, though, because that's my area. It's always been advisory. Really, we have a little bit of compliance and employment tax, but it's minimal. And where I've had like difficulties, I suppose, particularly with more junior members of staff, is I don't know, you can delegate something, and they might take everything you say completely literally and not kind of think around it at all. So then, as soon as they get stuck, they'll either just guess at something, which is never really a good way to do it, or they'll just come back to you. And it's never particularly like helpful from like managing a piece of work perspective, because when you delegate something, obviously you want it to be done and come back to you at a decent standard so you can kind of finish it off. I've never really kind of put my finger on exactly like what it is in people that are good at doing that at a junior level and those that aren't, but I think it's probably to do with a bit of almost a mixture of being proactive and taking initiative to sort things out yourself rather than just expecting someone else to solve it for you type thing. I don't know if that's kind of what you mean as well when you're talking about problem solving.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I suppose it's looking at it and going, right, I'm going to go away and really try and figure this out before going back to somebody and looking at all the different avenues. So yeah, that it's that initiative, I'd say, actually, that probably more what I was meaning, but still kind of encompassing problem solving as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of these skills are like so similar in a way, and it's hard. That's why it's so hard, I think, to put your finger on like what it is when you've got someone, when you know it's not working. It's hard to say like what the reason is, because it could be like a little bit of quite a few things, and it's I think you can just tell that it's not working, but it's sometimes hard to say why it's not. And equally, when you get someone that's really good, it's hard to put your finger on exactly why it is really good, but you just know it is because it's so easy to work with them type thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Earlier in the episode, you heard both Maisie and Sam say that technical skills is the universally most valued skill within tax professionals. And by this, Maisie also meant being able to take the complicated information and turn it into something that's client friendly. Coincidentally, I have 2 masterclasses that help you develop strong skills in this area. The Tax Advice Masterclass, which teaches you how to provide tax advice that's highly valued by clients, and the Tax Research Masterclass, which teaches you how to find the answer to any tax question, including the complicated ones. For full details of both masterclasses, head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/masterclasses. The next tax advice masterclass is in November 2024, so not far away now, and the next tax research masterclass is in May 2025 currently. I will do another one before that if I have enough demand to do one sooner.
I think as well, I just wanted to sort of touch on, if you don't mind, Jack, on sort of key things that people can work on, or I guess how they can move and shift from more of a heavy compliance role to more of an advisory focused role, because this is something I get asked all the time from individuals, maybe at that sort of newly qualified level when they've been doing a really compliance heavy role, but they want to make that shift into utilizing their CTA and putting it into practice and doing more advisory work. And I think a lot of that change in moving and shifting your career is very much down to working on certain skills and attributes. And I think we've covered a lot of them, but I think that it's just worth sort of discussing that. I think at that point, seeking mentorship from somebody internally at your firm is really important. And, you know, having that, not feeling, I guess, scared to ask for more help, whether that be, you know, an internal mentorship from another partner, or whether it be somebody externally to you that can help you. But I think that it's really important that you can try and put your hand up and put yourself out there for more sort of advisory work, and to continue to learning, whether that be, you know, attending more workshops, seminars, like Sam mentioned earlier, sort of more business development events. But also as well, if you're struggling to move and shift from that compliance work into more advisory work, then sometimes that's the point where you might need to think in your career, actually, is it time for me to move jobs? Is it a good time for me to move into a new role and reinvent myself in a new firm that is going to give me that work that I want? Because I think sometimes when you're really good at something and you're really good at compliance work, you know, that work is always going to be continued to be delegated down to you because you're a trusted person at doing a good job. So sometimes it's just really hard to make that shift in your role.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's the same actually when anyone's good at anything, regardless if it's compliance or something else. Because if they're making my life easier, for example, when I'm delegating to them, then I'm going to continue delegating to them. I mean, I always make a conscious effort to not overload someone and still let them develop and stuff. But it is easy. It's very easy for someone to pass work to someone that's doing a good job of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Should we talk briefly about the specialism differences then? Because I think if you've got someone in like advisory, and whether it's corporation tax or employment tax or private client, like, I think the skill set's going to be very similar. Obviously, we talked a bit about the difference between compliance and advisory in terms of like the more important skills, I suppose, in terms of differences between the two. But then, like, when I think about, say, like a tax investigations expert or someone that deals with disputes, for example, like, I think that is a different skill set to the others. So do you think, in terms of specialism differences, there's like any key differences from what you two can see?
Yeah, maybe it's better for me to answer that question actually, because obviously a lot of my clients are very specialized. Their tax teams are broken down into very, very specialized niche areas within tax. And I think that when I was really thinking about this question, I think there is a lot of crossover with all of the skills that we've discussed in this podcast so far. I think you need pretty much all of them for any specialism within tax. But I think the one that did stand out to me that was quite different was actually M&A tax. And I think that's because the role itself encompasses a lot more project management and prioritizing. And I think being able to work at a really fast pace and be able to bring together advice from multi jurisdictions and be that point of contact for that client, but also manage it concisely and effectively. So I think perhaps a bit more project management experience and expertise when it comes to M&A taxes is quite important, and perhaps a bit different to some of the other areas of tax. But I think the other one that you mentioned as well, tax disputes, definitely, I think that's more, you know, I would say more of a sort of deeply analytical, problem solving, advisory area within tax. So again, I think just coming back to some of those skills that we talked about at the beginning, I think that sort of that deep technical skill set and that sort of analytical problem solving complexity to the way that you think is really important for a role in that space.
Yeah. I suppose just on one last one then on this section about valued skills and attributes then. In terms of grade differences, I think it's probably easy to think about this if we think about, say, one area of specialism and how it could be different between the grades. So let's just take employment taxes, since that's where I work and it's what I'm more familiar with. But so within kind of employment taxes, there's certain skills and attributes that are valued. And do you think when it comes into like the grades, that really it's just about at each grade they're expected to have a certain kind of capability in that skill, and the more senior that you get, the better you're expected to be in each one? Or do you think it's a little bit more complicated than that?
I think certainly that kind of, I suppose, as you're working through your qualification and up to sort of manager level, it's more about your kind of attitude and willingness to sort of get involved in a bit of everything, or, kind of learning those new skills. I think, people that I've seen do really well, or, when I'm asked to look at those sorts of level hires, some of the, the words that come up are, kind of being hungry and really wanting it, and being happy with, a few different things thrown at them and go, right, okay, I'm going to go away. I'm going to really have a good go at this. I know that seems like quite a simple answer, but at that sort of, kind of training contract or up to sort of manager level, I'd say it's about being enthusiastic and really wanting to go for it with whatever's put in front of you.
Yeah. So is it fair to say then really at the more junior level, attributes are probably more important than actual skills at that point, and the willingness to learn those skills? Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, ultimately that you're still developing, aren't you? Those skill sets, and we talked a lot about the technical aspect earlier, and 100% there's got to be a certain sort of technical ability there. But I'd say at those grades, that's where that can be a little bit less important. It's more about, right, they don't have all the technical know-how. I can possibly teach them that, but what I really want those attributes of, like I say, the strong work ethic, etc. All the things I mentioned before, because sometimes that can't be taught. If you see it in me.
Yeah, no, I do. I was talking to my wife about it recently, actually. I mean, I'll probably talk to her about it too much, probably gets bored of it, but I just think like at the junior level, like as long as they've got the baseline capability to learn the tax knowledge, and they've got, I suppose, a certain level of intelligence in the right areas, say, I think you can work with them as long as they're keen to do a good job, that they're trying hard, and that they want to learn. I think if you have a junior with that mindset, I think they'll do really well. I think the ones that struggle at the more junior levels are the ones that just go something like, because I've heard this mindset before, oh, I'm just a trainee, I can't be expected to do that. Well, what a rubbish kind of mindset to kind of learn and develop. Yeah, you might be a trainee, but that's your time to train and learn. And if you're not giving it your all in the things that you're doing, you're not really ever going to give yourself the opportunity to learn it. And then you'll want a promotion, but you won't have developed the skills to get that promotion. So then you'll end up just becoming frustrated with yourself. I mean, I've actually seen that happen probably twice in my career already with juniors.
Yeah, I agree so much on that point. And I also think it's about, as a junior, asking for, some feedback on the work that you've done, being sort of almost a bit critical of yourself. How can I be better? Having that real urge to want to do better, and, seeking that honest feedback to help you. I think a lot of people forget about doing that, and it's quite a simple way to be able to progress and to know what you need to do to improve.
Yeah, for sure. I think they're almost vital in a way. I think you can get
Yeah.
away without some of these things, but your progression and development is just going to be so much slower. And then in the process, you're probably just going to frustrate a lot of people that you're working with, and that's just like a recipe for disaster if you want to get promoted and have pay rises and all that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more and more now, the, promotions are not based on time served anymore. I think historically they probably were a bit more focused around that. You need to be at the tax associate level for 2 years before you can progress to the next grade. But I don't think that's necessarily so much of a thing anymore. I think if you're showing that you're doing well, if you're showing that you're improving, you've got that ambition, that drive, and that want to learn, I think people are progressing and shooting through the ranks a lot quicker than perhaps they were in the past.
Yeah. So I don't know what your two experiences of this then, but like, I suppose I'm asking this question because of me, really. Like, I've always felt like I've really excelled in like probably two areas, really. First off, technical, not just being able to know stuff, but figure it out. That's always been like my strongest skill. And then probably for about 3 years in, when I finally understood how to provide a good piece of advice, I think that's also been a big strength for me. And it's not to say that I'm not good in any of the other areas, but those two are standouts for me for sure. What how do kind of accountancy firm employees react when someone is very, very good at, say, one or two things, but maybe less so than the others? Does that make them much less valuable to that accountancy firm? Will they put them into a box in terms of, unless they learn this thing, they're only going to be that grade? Or like, what's kind of your experience around that? Because I'd be interested to hear it.
I think this can depend on what type of firm you're employed by sometimes. And I think what I mean by that is, it's a smaller firm, you're kind of pushed into doing a bit of everything anyway. So you tend to develop skills in different areas. What I would say is somebody in your situation, Jack, is I suppose is trying to push, to push your way into other areas and make sure that the work that you're being given isn't just to your sort of skill set. I would say, in terms of firms, certainly more at the mid-tier and valuing a specific skill, whether that be like, technical advisory or business development, I'd say possibly more so. And this sounds like a bit of a cop-out answer, but it really isn't. Possibly more so at that kind of, at that top 100 or independent firm. I'd say it's having a little bit of everything that's valued the most. Yes, you technically got to be there, but it's then being able to provide advice in a really good way. And then also being able to do a good job on BD and being able to kind of lead and manage a team. I'm not saying you have to be an expert in every single one of those, but where I've seen people really excel is kind of having touch points in a few different skill areas.
Yeah, is it the same for you, Maisie, in like the top 10 big four side of things?
I would say perhaps slightly different in a larger firm. And I think that's because the tax teams are typically a lot bigger. So they almost have the ability to be able to take somebody on board or to help develop somebody who's very, very strong in one area. So if, for example, you're extremely technically strong, but actually you really don't like the business development side, you really don't like leading a team, and actually you just want to focus solely on technical work and projects day in, day out, they can facilitate that. You don't have to necessarily be good at everything because they have other people in the team that can balance you out on perhaps the areas that you don't want to focus on or perhaps aren't as strong in. So I think sometimes, that's why you'll see the larger firms, they have what they call technical teams. So tax technical teams that will solely focus on that, for example. But I do think there is still an element throughout your career and as you progress, no matter what firm you're in, that you do try to become that well-rounded tax professional. And I think what I mean by that well-rounded tax professional is being able to do a bit of everything, because that genuinely is what most people want to hire. So it's somebody who can, lead a team, can delegate work, can manage those relationships with clients and run those projects, do a bit of business development, but also be quite good at the technical. So I do think that, yes, if you're good at one thing, sometimes the bigger firm can facilitate that. But I do agree with Sam that actually having a broad skill set will really help you to develop quicker.
This is actually where I think it's quite hard to be a tax professional, because I think when you look at like a lot of other professions, like people can become very senior or very well paid by just being like very good at one or two things. But I do think, generally speaking, in tax, it doesn't work quite like that. And I think it's because, particularly when you work in an accountancy firm, the responsibility for a lot of things is on you, particularly in like the senior roles, from like senior manager onwards. Like as you say, you're expected to win work, you might need to manage people, you might need to manage clients, you might need to draft reports or review them, you might need to give technical input. Like there's an awful lot of things that you have to do, I think, at the more senior roles of being a tax professional. In some ways, I think it's like unfair, but I suppose it's almost life. And at least if you know that that's what the world is like and that's what's valued and expected by employers, and at least you can work towards it to make sure that you do make yourself well-rounded, as we've talked about.
Absolutely. But I do think, there are ways that you can become more well-rounded, like we've discussed. And I think that, over time you learn from the people around you. And I think having good mentors and good people to learn from is really important. And that's why I think a lot of people who are sat now in these remote working roles, it kind of baffles me a bit. I think how are you going to learn? How are you going to develop yourself? How are you going to become better? You need to be surrounded by people because there's no textbook to say how to become a partner, or how to progress your career in tax, and there's no easy way of doing it. So I think it's also important to surround yourself by people where you can.
Yeah. I mean, I agree to some extent with that point. I think surround yourself with people that you can learn from. Yes, I don't think you have to be in the same office as them though to learn from them personally. I think it does have its pros and cons doing that, but I think I worked at home ever since COVID up until April this year. I was a full-time home worker, and I went in the office about once a month. And if I was in the office more than 3 days in a month, it was really surprising. It just didn't really happen. And in that time, I managed to go from, I suppose, a new manager to senior manager to director by not being in the office over that period. So I think it's possible. I suppose it depends what type of person you are as well. I never really struggled with the interpersonal side of things. I've always been fine speaking to clients, like not just being a boring tax person for them, getting along with them, being able to manage things. So it might be different because my natural skill set is different to some other people, but I suppose I managed to get away with it without having to go to the office every day.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, we could do a whole nother podcast around flexibility and like what the market's like now and what our thoughts are on it. But maybe we'll save that for another day.
Maybe that's a good idea. So just in terms of directors and partners specifically then, because I know there's going to be a fair chunk of people who are listening that want to get there or are already there and want to do a good job of it. Like what skills and attributes are the most important for those roles, and what should people work on there for if they want to get to those grades and want to do a good job of them?
I think from my perspective, I'm probably going to mention some of the stuff that I've already talked about, but I'll touch on it. Things like relationship building and networking, good stakeholder management. Like I said, when I've seen more general practices expand into different tax service lines, that's where that skill's become really important. If you're a partner, being able to go in there and work with an audit partner, accounts partner, or whoever it may be, to really sort of focus on that. One thing that I thought I'd mention, and it's not necessarily a skill, but I've seen a few people sort of look at, who come up to that kind of director or partnership conversation that are perhaps, just done an APT or an ACA or something like that, and maybe not gone on to do a CTA. And that's the only thing that, certainly from a more mid-tier OMB stance, that I've seen people struggle with a little bit. There's been a few examples over the last few years that I can think of. So I would encourage, if you think you're going to go down that road, to definitely do a CTA, because I know sometimes they push it. So that's why I thought I'd mention it. It's just one of the things that I was thinking about what I definitely get asked for when I'm looking at kind of partner and director hires.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is it any different for you, Maisie, in the higher end of the market?
I think really similar, to be honest. I think when I think about an assistant manager and a manager, and I think about a senior manager and a director, what are the really key differences in terms of skill sets and attributes? And I think it really is the points that we've mentioned is that relationship building, that sort of commercial awareness. I think a lot of my clients will say to me, if I've got a candidate interviewing for a director role, sometimes they just don't have that commercial awareness that they probably should have as a director. Like I said right at the beginning of the podcast, I think I was talking about that sort of cross-selling, being able to spot opportunities when you're working on a piece of work, being able to introduce somebody from another team to further generate revenue from that client. It's maximizing that revenue from that client, I think, is really important. And what, that's not an expectation at a junior end, but at a more senior end, that's definitely something that you need to be doing.
So when you're talking about commerciality there, then you're really thinking about, like, we've got this client, what stuff is going to be useful for them, so therefore we can provide them more services. That's kind of what you're talking about by the sounds of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in a bigger firm environment, well, actually probably in a mid-tier and smaller firm as well. But I think in a big firm, like a Big Four, a lot of the work that is generated is actually internally. There's not very many situations where partners need to go out to the market and cold BD. It just doesn't really happen. So when we're talking about business development in a Big Four, we're talking about making sure that you're internally networking, so that a partner working in corporate tax knows that they can refer work to you as an employment tax specialist and can put the client in touch and bring some more revenue to the employment tax team. So it's about making sure that communication internally is happening and that revenues are being generated from that client and maximized from that client.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think actually it's becoming probably more important in mid-tier as well, to be fair, because even in my area, like if you can get in with one client that you know really well and you can see all the different areas that they need help in because they trust you, it's much easier to, I suppose, to get extra work on the back of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed.
So should we just touch upon very briefly then, like the skills and attributes that are less important, let's say, because I suppose people should probably spend less time working on those as opposed to the ones that are more important and more valued by employers?
Really difficult one to answer this, I thought, Jack. In terms of what's not valued, because I think it can be very different. As we pointed out, it's the skills and attributes that a Big Four might, prioritize are different to what a, kind of a mid-tier might look at. I think, I suppose piggybacking on what Maisie was just saying, from a, if I'm following on from that last question, kind of like partner director stuff, what's probably more valued or not valued? I'd say, what is valued in a mid-tier is that kind of, that commercial acumen and being able to not do cold business development, but being able to spot those opportunities. And I suppose the opposite of that, would be less valued. But it's a really difficult one to answer, because I don't think there's one thing, I think you could add value onto every sort of skill and attribute to a point. I don't know if you've got any other thoughts, mate. I really struggled on this one.
Yeah, to be honest, same. And I was trying to pinpoint why, and maybe it comes back to that point that you mentioned earlier, Jack, that actually it is hard being a tax professional, because you do need a huge amount of skills and you do need to be quite good at most of them. I think but skills that are less valued will depend on the grade that you're at, like Sam just mentioned. And I think that, at the junior end, it is that sort of commercial mindset, that problem solving perhaps that you need to develop and work on. And then at the more senior end, I think you need to kind of be good at everything really to get to the top. That's kind of my view. And I think, it's a tough one to answer really.
Yeah. I was thinking, to be honest, it'd probably just be lack of the skills that we've talked about that would be the issue, rather than a particular skill that's really not valued by someone, because you can pretty much spin any skill or attribute in a positive way if they've got it.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, unless you're some form of mass murderer or something, obviously, massive no.
Yeah, no, I don't endorse that one.
So if people want to learn more about you two anyway, or even get in touch, where are the best places for them to go?
I'd say connecting with me on LinkedIn is always the best place to speak with me. I'm quite active on there, posting about not just recruitment, but golf and stuff like that. I'm a big sports fan, and try to make it as interesting as possible for people.
Yeah, I would agree. To be honest, Tin, I'm always pretty active on there. So please feel free to connect with me if you want to discuss the London market specifically, but also our website. Go and take a look at our website. We've actually just had a brand new website that looks pretty cool, actually. So we've got lots of content on there, lots of videos for you to watch, lots of engaging content that we're trying to create. So you can always contact us on there as well.
Thanks to Maisie and Sam for sharing their experiences in the episode. You can now take what you've learned from this episode and better focus on developing skills that will propel your tax career in the right direction. If you don't have them already, make sure that you do have the strong foundations with technical ability, as both Sam and Maisie mentioned that this is a universally highly valued skill by employers of tax professionals. Both of my masterclasses will help you with this. The show notes for this episode can be accessed at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP107. The show notes include contact details for Sam and Maisie and also a link to my masterclasses. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe to sign up for email notifications. Episodes are bi-weekly and are released on Mondays. But that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed the episode and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop, and improve your tax career. Until next time.